have this opportunity to share some comments with you that relate to a new organ collection from Concordia, Christmastide Fughettas. There are 14 settings in this collection. When I prepared and began to think about this little project, two concerns surfaced in my mind that I thought I would respect. One was that the settings would be very accessible, and the second one would be that the settings would include the full tune, the complete tune of the carol or hymn. What prompted the accessibility idea was I thought these are selections that will be used during the Christmas season. That's a time when most organists have more activity and involvement than usual, and probably less practice time than they would like. I also thought that if they were very accessible, sight readable for many, they would help organists with somewhat less skills, particularly if the pedal were not too involved. So the pedal notes, by and large, are longer note values. There's one particular exception, and I'll mention that later. Regarding the whole tune, there were two ideas that came to me. One was that if the organists have an interest in playing organ stanzas, they could use these better if they had the full tune, so the congregation, the listeners, could follow it. And for that reason, the tunes, in part, are not highly embellished. Extending the tune or including the complete tune gives them a little more length and perhaps permits them to work a little better as voluntaries. The time for these probably is 2 minutes plus, a little bit more. There are two that are a little less, and they have some repeat options if you choose to use them. There are several smaller features that I'd like to mention as well. All of the settings begin with several measures of introduction that precede the first entrance of the hymn tune for the use as a Fughetta theme. These measures are optional if you chose, and they have several other potential uses if you'd so desire. One would be if perhaps before the last stanza or verse of the hymn or carol is sung, between the penultimate stanza and the last stanza, you might like to put a little bridge or interlude. The Germans call this a Zwischenspiel, an interlude that has musical relationship to the tune itself. You could use them for that. At the same time, if you chose, perhaps at the end of a service where you don't need to introduce the whole hymn, partly because it's familiar and time might be an issue, you could just lift these early measures and use them as a brief intonation. Similarly, the ends of the settings, almost all, include the last phrase of the hymn or the carol. These, I think, you could extract and use as a coda-like ending if you so chose, especially if you would use the beginning, the introductory measures, or the complete setting as a prelude, concluding with a coda-like group of measures that relates also to the setting thematically, might be useful to you. Concordia has helped us very much in that they have made 3 of these settings available on their website. If you go to their website and look for this collection, you'll be directed to 3. The first of which happens to be the last setting in the collection, on the charming little tune, Tempus adest Floridum, Gentle Mary, laid her child in a lowly manger. For that setting, I would suggest you consider some more feminine sounds, pleasant flutes perhaps, or strings as the accompanimental part. And for a melody that's on a separate manual, perhaps an 8 and 2 2/3 flute, or 8/4 and 2 2/3, possibly with a mild tremulant. And if these aren't available, or you prefer a pleasant mild reed, could be another prospect. There's a little musical germ idea that I've used throughout the accompanimental part of the settings. It's a pair of oscillating diatonic pitches that extend for a little time. And these can suggest a rocking idea. The second tune that they chose is a staunch German chorale. It's less familiar than some of the others, but a wonderful, lovely tune. It's very solid, and a substantive text that goes with it. I chose to include that in part because there is a limited number of settings available on that tune that's accessible, and that this might help organists if they use that tune or wish it to relate it to the tune if it's used in a service with some thematic material. For this being a little more of a masculine type tune, I would like to offer a suggestion of consideration of at least a 4-foot principal or octave in the organ part, surrounded by some other stops that would complement that particular voice and give strength to it. The third is a charming French little carol, which you'll know as Noel Nouvelet. It's the one tune and setting that uses groups of eighth notes in the pedal, and that's dictated pretty much by the tune itself that has that grouping in the melody. For this one, I would like to suggest something that has a higher pitch. Perhaps 8 and 2-foot flutes might work if the two are pleasant and clear, or perhaps an 8-foot flute with a 2-foot principal. If you have a little more of a choice available, possibly an 8 and 4-foot flute with a 1 1/3 mutation. Admittedly, this tune setting will probably take a little more practice, but if you take the time to learn it, there's a bonus, and you probably have already thought of it. It would work nicely if you chose during Eastertide to support the Easter text, "Now the green blade riseth." The registrations, though, by and large, are more suggestions or ideas rather than prescriptive to be used as they are, because all organs have somewhat differences. Acoustics entering in makes it even more important to choose stops with care. If you look at this setting with interest, I hope that you'll find the collection, as I indicated earlier, accessible, adaptable, and flexible, that it might serve you in a number of different ways. If you choose some of the settings during the Christmastide season, I hope you find that they are helpful in connecting and relating to your worshipers in a meaningful way that help them follow along in the service and the text. Thanks again for viewing this video and for the opportunity to share this new collection with you.